Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever felt completely running on fumes, but you still had to force yourself to put on a brave face for your friends? Today, we're practicing your English listening skills through a powerful, real-life story about Gavin. He's dealing with a severe, invisible illness, chronic fatigue. In this video, you're going to learn natural idioms, phrasal verbs, and daily expressions about health, social pressure, and setting firm boundaries. Let's look at Chapter 1, The Heavy Mask.
Gavin stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing his smile. It was a practiced, artificial grin designed to hide the fact that he was completely running on fumes. On the outside, he looked perfectly healthy, a regular 20-something guy getting ready for his best friend's birthday dinner. On the inside, however, he was experiencing a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Living with an invisible illness meant that every social outing required a massive amount of acting. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the physical heaviness weighing down his limbs. His body felt as though it were lined with lead, and his heavy-lidded eyes desperately wanted to close. Yet the thought of canceling filled him with instant guilt. He didn't want to be the friend who always flaked out, so he resolved to put on a brave face and push through. Gavin grabbed his jacket, his hands moving in slow motion. He knew exactly what the evening would demand of him. He would have to laugh at jokes, maintain eye contact, and pretend to be vibrant, all while his internal battery was sitting at a dangerous 2%. He was already dead tired, and the night hadn't even begun. Staring at his reflection one last time, he adjusted his collar and forced the exhaustion back behind his eyes. The mask was on. He stepped out of his apartment and into the cool night air, praying he would have enough fuel to make it through the appetizers.
The restaurant was a chaotic wall of sound. Loud music blasted from the overhead speakers, and dozens of patrons laughed and chatted over the clinking of glasses. Gavin sat in a crowded booth, trying desperately to keep up with the fast-paced conversation. To his friends, he looked entirely normal as he nodded along and smiled at the right moments. In reality, his mind felt trapped in a thick, heavy fog. Every time someone spoke, it took his brain a few extra seconds just to process the words. When his friend Leo cracked a joke, Gavin forced a laugh, but the effort felt like lifting a heavy weight. He wanted to chime in and share a story of his own, but the sheer energy required to speak above the noise was too much. He felt completely disconnected, like a spectator watching his own life on a screen that was playing in slow motion. The sensory overload was draining the tiny bit of energy he had left, making his limbs feel heavier by the minute. Then Leo raised his glass and announced that they were all going to head out to a crowded, high-energy bar down the street to continue the celebration. A sudden wave of panic washed over Gavin as the group cheered in agreement. He looked at the exit, knowing his body was about to hit a wall completely if he didn't escape soon.
Gavin cleared his throat and glanced at his watch, trying to make his exit look as casual as possible. He told the group he needed to call it a night, fabricating a classic, relatable excuse about an early work meeting the next morning. His friends groaned playfully, calling him a party pooper, entirely unaware of the physical toll the evening had already taken on him. Gavin offered a tight smile, hugged the birthday boy, and managed to slip away before the rest of the group paid the bill. The moment he climbed into the back of the rideshare vehicle, the heavy mask instantly dropped.
He collapsed against the cold leather seat, closing his eyes as a wave of intense physical relief washed over him. Yet, as the car pulled away from the bright neon lights of the restaurant, a familiar heavy guilt began to settle in his chest. He unlocked his phone and watched the group chat light up with photos of everyone ordering a second round of drinks at the bar. A deep sense of FOMO gripped him as he looked at his friends, smiling, laughing, and creating memories without him. He felt a painful pang of isolation, realizing how easily he was being left behind by the fast-moving world around him. He desperately worried that his friends would start viewing him as a permanent killjoy who just didn't care anymore. Staring out the window at the passing streetlights, he wondered how many more early exits his friendships could actually survive. Over the next 3 weeks, Gavin's phone became a source of constant anxiety. On Tuesday, Leo texted inviting him to a casual coffee meetup after work, but Gavin was trapped in bed, completely paralyzed by fatigue. On Friday, the group chat organized a weekend hike up a steep mountain trail, a physical challenge that Gavin knew would devastate his body for days. Each time, he typed out a polite refusal, hit send, and watched his social connections slowly drift apart. Eventually, he noticed a quiet, heartbreaking shift. The invitations began to dry up altogether. The group chat went quiet for hours, then days, as his friends unconsciously stopped reaching out to the guy who always said no. Gavin knew exactly what they were thinking, realizing they had slapped the dreaded Flake label right next to his name. Without the truth, his friends simply assumed he was being distant, antisocial, or perhaps even stuck up. He wanted to scream that he cared, that he missed them, and that he desperately wanted to be there with them. Instead, he was forced to read between the lines of their increasingly rare, formal text messages. It was deeply painful not to take it personally, knowing they were moving on with their lives while he remained frozen in place. He realized that by hiding his invisible illness, he was letting his friendships slowly erode into nothingness. Gavin was slowly pushing a grocery cart down the cereal aisle when he unexpectedly bumped into an old friend, Maya. Her face lit up with a warm, genuine smile, and she immediately reached out to give him a brief, enthusiastic hug. She told him it felt like a lifetime since they last spoke, asking him directly where he had been hiding lately. Gavin hesitated for a split second, deciding to be a bit more honest than usual by mentioning he had been struggling heavily with his health. Maya looked at him closely, her eyes scanning his face before she offered a deeply frustrating, dismissive response. She laughed softly and said that she totally understood, claiming that she was also completely exhausted from her busy work week. Then she eagerly offered a wave of well-meaning advice, asking if he had tried taking vitamin B12 or doing morning yoga to boost his energy. She patted his arm lightly, assuring him that he probably just needed a good night's sleep to finally get over it. Gavin felt a familiar, heavy knot of frustration tighten in his stomach as her words completely missed the mark. He offered a polite, strained nod, realizing how completely pointless it was to try and explain the reality of his condition in that moment. To Maya, his chronic illness was just a temporary bout of sleepiness, an ordinary problem with an incredibly simple, everyday fix. Walking away from the interaction, he felt more isolated than ever, deeply stung by how invalidating the conversation had actually been. Determined to break the cycle and prove he was still a reliable friend, Gavin forced himself to agree to a weekend beach trip. He spent Saturday morning packing his bags with a false sense of optimism, telling himself he would simply push through the exhaustion.
When they arrived at the coast, he threw himself into every activity, playing beach volleyball and laughing loudly around the evening bonfire. He felt a rush of joy being back in the center of things, but secretly, he knew he was spending energy he simply did not have. By Sunday morning, the bill for his overexertion arrived with terrifying force, and Gavin woke up to a massive full-body crash. His limbs felt completely paralyzed, pinned to the mattress by an invisible, crushing weight that made even lifting his head impossible. His throat was raw, his head pounded, and a profound, terrifying weakness vibrated through every single muscle. Hearing his friends packing the cars downstairs, tears of sheer frustration slipped down his face as he realized he had finally hit a wall. He had to text Leo from just one floor above, explaining through a screen that he was too sick to open his eyes, let alone join the drive home. The weekend that was supposed to save his friendships instead resulted in a total physical and emotional wipeout. As the sounds of his friends' cars fading into the distance echoed through the house, Gavin lay in the dark, weeping. He knew he could never pretend to be normal again. He was finally forcing himself to pay the price for ignoring his body's boundaries.
Gavin sat on his living room couch, his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared at the front door. He had invited Leo over for a quiet coffee, realizing that keeping his secret was doing far more damage than the truth ever could. When the doorbell rang, Gavin took a slow, deep breath, determined to finally lay his cards on the table. Leo walked in carrying 2 warm mugs, sitting down with a look of genuine concern that made Gavin's throat instantly tighten. For the first 10 minutes, Gavin struggled to put it into words, terrified that his best friend would think he was just making dramatic excuses. Finally, he closed his eyes and began to open up, explaining that his exhaustion wasn't a lack of sleep, but a persistent cellular drought. He described the leaden weight in his limbs, the mental fog, and the agonizing guilt of having to cancel plans week after week. Leo listened in total, unbroken silence, his initial confusion slowly melting away as the gravity of Gavin's daily reality sank in. Gavin admitted how much it hurt to see the group moving on without him, and how terrified he was of permanently losing his friends. Hearing the raw honesty in Gavin's voice, Leo leaned forward, deeply apologetic for having completely misread his distance as apathy. It was a profound, bittersweet moment of relief that instantly seemed to clear the air between the 2 lifelong friends. For the first time in an entire year, Gavin felt completely seen, realizing that vulnerability was the only bridge back to the world.
Over the next month, Gavin began a difficult but necessary practice called pacing. He started treating his daily energy like a strict financial budget, realizing he only had a few precious coins to spend each day. Every activity, from making breakfast to replying to a text message, had a specific cost that he had to calculate carefully. He began to draw the line with his schedule, learning the hard way that his physical health had to become completely non-negotiable. The hardest part was learning to say no to people he loved without offering a long list of anxious, descriptive apologies. When Leo invited him to a busy weekend barbecue, Gavin checked his internal battery, saw it was low, and politely declined. Instead of feeling a wave of familiar crushing guilt, he took a deep breath and reminded himself that he was protecting his body. He was learning to pace oneself through a world that was constantly demanding everyone to move at a frantic, chaotic speed.
It felt incredibly uncomfortable at first, like building a brand new muscle while breaking a lifetime habit of people-pleasing. Yet, as the days passed, he noticed a subtle, empowering shift. He wasn't crashing nearly as hard or as often as before. By setting firm boundaries, he was finally taking control of his life instead of letting his illness make all the choices for him. He realized that drawing a line wasn't about shutting his friends out, it was about preserving enough fuel to let them back in.
Gavin quickly realized that setting boundaries was a major test for his social circle. While a few casual acquaintances drifted away entirely, his true friends did something beautiful. They began to adapt. Leo took the lead, organizing a brand new kind of weekend gathering that didn't require Gavin to expend a single drop of precious energy. Instead of planning loud, chaotic nights out at bars, the group started coordinating incredibly low-key hangouts right in Gavin's living room. They showed up on a Friday evening with takeout boxes, pajamas, and board games, completely content to just sit together on the couch. They told Gavin explicitly that he didn't need to entertain them, make conversation, or even stay awake if his body needed to rest. It was an incredible relief to realize that his friends were entirely willing to meet halfway to keep him in their lives. They made generous concessions for his health, switching out physical activities for quiet picnics in the park or casual movie nights. Even on the days when Gavin couldn't handle visitors at all, his phone was filled with supportive, low-pressure text messages. His friends would send funny memes or quick updates, always adding a sweet note that said, "No need to reply, just thinking of you." Gavin watched this new dynamic unfold with a profound sense of gratitude, his heart swelling with a deep warmth. He realized that true friendship wasn't about doing everything together, it was about protecting each other's peace and adapting to each other's limitations. Gavin sat on a blanket beneath a shady oak tree, watching his friends chat around a quiet backyard grill. He hadn't found a magical cure for his condition, but looking around, he realized he had found something even better: peace. He had learned to strike a balance between honoring his body's limitations and nurturing the relationships that kept him grounded. When the group began packing up to head to a crowded local music venue, Gavin stood up, smiled, and calmly announced he was leaving. There was no rush of anxiety, no elaborate excuse, and absolutely no crushing weight of guilt holding him back this time. Leo gave him a warm fist bump, reminding him to text when he got home, while Maya waved cheerfully from across the yard. Walking back to his car in the quiet evening light, Gavin felt an incredible, undeniable sense of peace of mind. He had stayed for exactly 2 hours, fully enjoying every single second, and was leaving before his internal battery hit zero. He finally understood that a fulfilling social life wasn't about showing up to every event or matching everyone else's frantic pace. It was entirely about quality over quantity, cherishing the deep, authentic connections with the people who truly saw and accepted him. Living with chronic illness had given him a challenging yet deeply beautiful new lease on life and a clearer perspective on what mattered. As he drove home into the peaceful twilight, Gavin smiled, completely ready to embrace his beautiful, carefully paced new normal.
Gavin's journey reminds us that true friends will always meet you halfway. Now, let's test your English. Which of today's expressions was your favorite? Was it running on fumes, hitting a wall, or getting a new lease on life? Leave a comment below using one of these phrases in your own sentence, and I will personally reply to check your grammar. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. If you found this story helpful for your English listening practice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. See you in the next story. Goodbye.